Helloween festivities, when many of our ancestors passed away during late autumn and the recurring days of the common cold, when the ground fog barely lifted even during the day, the relatives would gather in the village cemetery to bury their dead. They also visited those who had already passed. This was usually many weeks after the harvest festival, when the last fruit had been picked from the trees and the ripe vegetables had long since been brought in from the fields. Now the turnips and pumpkins, hollowed out for soups and side dishes, sat bravely on the windowsills with a light inside to ward off animals, but also ghosts, will-o'-wisps, goblins, and the wicked figures of darkness. Life was a torment, and if an old person fell ill during this time, the life was soon breathed out, for no one who was not perfectly healthy survived the cold, long winter. It was at this time that Erwin Hauser lost his wife, who had already carried a number of years on her back, but who had been ailing since summer, and about whom one heard here and there in the village that she would probably not survive the winter. It happened on a night only known from nightmares. There was a deadly silence that night, and now and then one heard the call of an owl from the nearby forest. The ground fog had already risen above knee-height and crept coldly around the legs as Erwin brought the last purchases home from the neighboring village, food and medicine for his sick wife. The streetlights had long been out. The path led past the parish church and the nearby cemetery, when suddenly a lightning bolt illuminated the darkness and a long bluish glow was visible. In the pale blue shimmer of light, one could vaguely make out the stone graves, and on one of these graves a figure with head was discernible. Ernst was gripped by horror. Although he had been walking this path for many decades, he had never seen anything comparable. Everything should have been as always, but on this evening nothing was as usual. With quick steps he walked forward and did not look back. The medicine had to be brought home quickly. His thoughts revolved only around his wife. She needed the medicine for her cold and high fever. As he approached the start of the village and could perceive the radiated warmth of the houses, he believed himself safe. The creature must have vanished, and he must be safe. But he was mistaken. All at once he felt an ice-cold hand on his shoulder, which made him flinch. His step immediately halted. He barely dared to turn around. The hand on his shoulder was ice-cold and weighed on him like lead. The fog had condensed all around, as if a plague breath lay in the air. When he did turn around, glowing eyes sparkled at him from under a hood. "Who are you?" Erwin whispered, his voice trembling. The figure did not move. Only a soft, hoarse shriek pierced the silence, like ice tearing under tension as it forms on the surface of a lake. Then came the voice, whispering, croaking. "You have known life, Erwin Hauser, and now you stand at the threshold of what your wife will no longer reach." Ernst felt the blood in his veins freeze. I just have to go home. She is sick. She needs medicine." He began to talk to himself. A gust of wind whipped through the narrow alleys, and the fog turned into a kind of grey wall that swallowed all light. Shadows slid forth from the darkness, ghostly figures that moved whispering and shrieking, the boundaries between ground and sky blurring. Erwin recognized his own fears in the shapes, the image of his dying wife, the faces of the villagers and relatives who had long been dead, yet now they laughed without lips, only with empty eye sockets. Terrified, he stumbled forward. The figure speaking to him came closer, silently, and with every step the fog seemed thicker, colder, and from the distance the gravestones creaked with sounds of stone rubbing against stone. Erwin ran forward after involuntarily letting out a scream of terror. Suddenly he felt the cold hand on his shoulder again. His heart pounded faster, his lungs burned. Before him a faint light flickered from a small turnip on a house's windowsill. But when he looked closer, the carved-out eyes of the turnip moved, following him, and a soft whisper reached him. "You are too late. You are too late." The voice came from all directions. Wreaths of fog crept from the alleys, and panic wanted to burst out of him, to vent itself through a shrill scream. But his throat was constricted, and he could no longer utter a sound. Then figures emerged from the dense fog and began to pursue and hunt him in the last few meters to his front door. With strength summoned in final desperation, he tore open the door in front of him and slammed it shut behind him with a bang. Done, he was inside, and the door was locked. For no price in the world would he have set foot outside again that evening. The medicine was safely stowed in his jacket and ready for use. Even before he looked for his wife in the bedroom, he brewed a tea, pouring the water together with the medicine into the cup. Shortly thereafter, he walked into his wife's bedroom to see how she was doing. She lay quietly in bed, staring at the ceiling with her eyes open, as if trying to see something there. As he approached, her eyes remained calm and impassive, and he noticed a peculiar sheen in them, as if ice had formed within them. When he touched her and tried to speak to her, he noticed the icy coldness of death on her body. She must have passed away while he was on his way. He could no longer feel a pulse on his wife's hand, and the panic from outside seemed to seize him again now. The shadows outside may have been bogeymen, empty shells of fog and shadows that he perceived as beings. It was Helloween, and there were many children wandering around, playing a prank by frightening people. But this was authentic. His wife had died as he tried to save her life. And with that she joined the long chain of events of a late autumn, between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice, where people had commemorated the dead since time immemorial, because this was exactly the time of the year when death claimed its victims, and most people breathed their last. That is why the festival of death was celebrated precisely at this time of year with Helloween, and the ancestors were remembered. The Celts made it a tradition to take exactly this time as their new year, and not the winter solstice, 45 days later. For many, Helloween was the beginning of the new, a time of turning in life, but also a time of dying and death. The new beginning was not far off, and the old, the past, always found a place in people's lives. They remembered the grandmother and the unforgettable moments with her, how the grandfather lit the kerosene lamp every evening, and they remembered the stories they told the children by the fireplace in this dark, cold time, tales from a distant era. In the Celtic Germanic tradition, death was never a definitive end and was always strongly linked to rebirth. The old cycles exhausted themselves. They came to rest, to be reborn somewhere in a different manner. November, the 12th moon of the year according to the lunar calendar, also called fog month, Nebelung, or wolf moon, was the best time to show people that every life had to pass away without the power of light of truth and without the warmth of love. Nebelung was the eternal memorial to what happened when the cycles of growth collapsed and stagnation set in. For everything interwoven in space-time had to submit to this cycle of becoming, being and passing away, could never escape this eternal cycle, and was thus defining for the people within it, because through the passing of their relatives at this time, they were deeply reminded in their consciousness that everything has an end, but every end also has a new beginning, and that this new beginning was the hope that never faded. That is why Helloween, Nebelung, the former turnip and light festival, was always also a moment of family, of cohesion, of feasting and celebrating in honor of the ancestors who were very close to one during this time of mourning, and where the gate to the other world always remained ajar. Today's consumer society has almost no knowledge of this anymore, but these nocturnal times around Helloween or Nebelung were not only spooky, but were surrounded by abundance, love and connection, and they illuminated the path of man and his society. After a long and beautiful phase of growth and thriving, everything subsided to rest again, only to be seized by new dynamics and effects afterward. And the most beautiful of all notions of our ancestors was that every deceased person would come into the world again in their descendants. And that is why the descendants were always given the name that a person truly approximated based on his appearance or his character. One recognized a great-grandfather, a distant cousin, or a father's brother in a son, and thereupon, after a while in childhood, someone received a new name that better suited his personality than the old name, and which thus remained definitive for the future. Ghost and spooky stories have always existed, but in the reality of Central and Northern European life, when relatives passed away, a different mood prevailed, one that affected the community much more deeply. The silence, the cold, and the darkness of the nights were fundamentally anchored in the nature of the people who originally lived as a clan in a longhouse, living together under one roof with the livestock in the stable. Only later were the sleeping quarters located one floor higher, above the cattle stable, so that the warmth generated below could be used for the sleeping chambers, thereby warming them by several degrees. The doors were firmly locked at night to protect against the cold winds prevailing outside. The walls between the wooden beams were filled with fibrous material and straw, and, together with clay, provided excellent insulation. The only hole in the house was the roof hole for the smoke outlet of the fireplace, whose opening could be adjusted. It was perceptibly cold in these houses, and anyone who was not strong or healthy enough did not survive this late autumn threshold to death and the new beginning. Therefore, many people feared this time, and because many cycles ended and the new began within it. This atmosphere can no longer be created in any modern house and with normal heating conditions, and is moreover far removed from everything we can still experience today in our modern society. But anyone who goes outside along on a quiet, cool, foggy November night and absorbs this atmosphere can at least feel a slight breath of the mood in their cooled heart, as their ancestors in Central and Northern Europe experienced it. It was a very subtle mood of gentle melancholy, of soft anxiety, but also of great abundance and contentment that an old cycle was now complete and a new cycle was beginning. There was also extreme gratitude toward the achievements and groundwork of the ancestors, because they made it possible for everything to take shape and good content, for life to go on, and for everything to find its place in it. The field crops and fruit had been harvested and processed, the food stores for surviving the winter were ready, the cellar was bursting at the seams with fruit, and dried fruits were stored in the warm, heated living room, the only warm place in the house which one partook of again and again. Now the time of silence began. This never had much to do with the spookiness of Helloween, but was much more an inner peace that, after the work of summer and autumn, passed into a phase of silence, but also into a phase of death and reflection on the ancestors, which had nothing at all to do with a commercialized time of trick or treat. The ancestors took everything more gently, everything was more modest, and just as at Christmas, the winter solstice, often only a candle was lit. People cooked and ate together to celebrate the rebirth of the sun's light in the world. Quietly, simply, but memorably, so it was sufficient in this cold, dark time of November to protect the house from evil spirits or wild animals, which now increasingly sought the proximity of people and their farms, with simple turnips hollowed out and carved with motifs on the windowsill. Nebelung, or the later Helloween, was a time of transformation and a time of change. We think today that the world, our society, is in perpetual progress, that technologies are constantly evolving, and that it is always for the best that everything changes. In doing so, we too often forget that every change entails an end, and not just a new beginning. We might have thought that artificial intelligence would always offer us only the best of the best, but we will perhaps be shocked by the ugly face it may yet have. Everything has an end, and where there is a new beginning, the old dies. Only when the old has been disappeared do we recognize its value, but by then it is gone, and it will no longer be able to arise. There will be new things, but the old will have disappeared. Helloween, the festival of the threshold of death of all change, reminds us deeply that all that was good and old also disappears forever, and we will not be able to retrieve it. Therefore, Helloween is also an urgent warning for us not to go too far, not to throw everything old and good overboard, or to bring it to destruction. For what is lost cannot be regained. What was will not be again, and cannot give us more warmth and light we already had. Not everything that calls itself modern can be valued. Not everything that is new or calls itself new improves the world. There is a great opportunity in slowing down, and a new kind of happiness often lies in reorientation.